next hour, Sadat Action Biography.
We are the oldest nation, the oldest written history, 7,000 years, the oldest government. Believe this, we are very proud.
As you're driving through the streets of Cairo or any other Egyptian town and the people are standing on the side of the street and cheering you, how do you know they really mean it?
It is something that you can feel by heart. By heart. I'm a man of the street, and I can feel it.
He's got a sense of timing. He understands his public. He knows how to deal with other politicians extremely well. At the same time, though, I think we must admit he is a statesman, because he is the first Arab leader who has been able really to lead the Arab world in modern times.
I must say he's one of the surprises of Middle Eastern history. He developed a sharpness of personality and independence of vision, which contrasted with the previous image of a ceremonial figurehead. And now I think most Israelis would agree with me in thinking that he is a more formidable and serious person than Nasser.
Sadat is a dedicated Egyptian nationalist. That, of course, he has the Arab cause at his heart. But I would not use the word fanatic in any sense with respect to Sadat.
Well, as a wife, of course, I prefer if he wasn't a president. Because at least he will be with us more, and he will be as a father and as a husband with us more.
Mr. President, what would you like people to write about you after you've gone?
I should like them to write on my tomb. He has lived for peace, and he has died for principles.
For the past 1,000 years, nobody in the West has bothered very much about getting along with the Arabs. They haven't amounted to very much. In the past 12 months, however, it's become a very big matter, not far on our agenda below getting along with Russia or getting along with China. There are about 100 million Arabs in about 20 Arab countries. Though they're not united and none is dominant, the most prestigious is Egypt, because it is the most populous. It's a piece of luck for us that the president of Egypt now is Anwar el-Sadat. He has expelled the Russians from Egypt. He's shown himself amenable to negotiation, as Nasser was not. He's opened his country up to Western investment, and he's displayed an admiration for the steward of our foreign policy, Henry Kissinger. For the past 4 months, ABC's chief Middle East correspondent, Peter Jennings, has been filming Sadat's every public move and a lot of private ones. For the next hour, we present Jennings' portrait of the #1 Arab.
Anwar Sadat has been president of Egypt since the sudden death of Gamal Abdel Nasser in 1970. Since his presidency began, Egypt and Israel have fought their 4th war, and there is pessimistic expectation about a 5th. Sadat's present popularity dates back to his decision to go to war in October 1973. He is carried along on the adulation of the crowd as only the 2nd meaningful Egyptian president in his nation's long history. He is a man of many parts. Above everything, Anwar el-Sadat is first an Egyptian. He has been a passionate nationalist since his early childhood. The First World War was ending in the year of Sadat's birth. The British had helped Egypt throw off Ottoman rule, but remained on as semi-rulers themselves. The land of the pharaohs continued to be dominated by foreigners. The burial sites of the ancient kings became training grounds for British cavalry. Sadat's grandmother told him the story of Din Shwai, a village not far from his own. In 1906, British soldiers were shooting pigeons there. The villagers objected, for the birds were daily food. In the confrontation, a British soldier died. Many peasants were punished. Sadat has a private collection of these photographs. Shots of a hurried trial, more of floggings. Villagers were hanged. Anwar Sadat has never forgotten what it could mean to raise a hand against the British.
Since my early days, I felt, what does the occupation mean, the foreign occupation? What does colonialism mean? What is the real relations between us and the British in our country?
Sadat was barely a teenager when he moved with his family to Cairo. The king on the throne was not Egyptian. He was Albanian. His ancestors had ruled Egypt earlier in history. The king, Fuad, had his young son Farouk at school in England. The British supported Fuad's throne. When the king died, Farouk returned to take his father's place. Egyptians don't always love their leaders, but they usually respect and sometimes fear the office.
I remember at that day, I stood in the street. I stood from 9 o'clock in the morning up till 2 in the afternoon, waiting for him, waiting to have a glimpse of our new king. And he was very popular at that time.
In Sadat's eyes, he did not remain popular for long. The British government continued to influence Farouk as they had his father. There was little future for boys like Sadat.
The country was not ours. We have only what I call the 0.5% community. It means that 0.5% has got everything, and 99.5% has got nothing at all.
Sadat, at high school in Cairo, demonstrated against the British. He was expelled twice before graduating. Ironically, at least one contact with the British was beneficial. In 1936, the military academy, looking today much like it did then, opened its doors to Egyptian boys from the lower class. Sadat, whose father worked for a British army doctor, made application.
My father was his chief clerk. So my father sought his recommendation, and in my file, you shall see that I was recommended to the military college by a senior British officer.
That must have been one of the only times a British officer recommended you for anything, wasn't it?
Quite right.
Mm-hmm.
They must be sorry for it.
Sadat was admitted, and so was another fervent Egyptian nationalist, Gamal Abdel Nasser. It was to be a giant step forward, the beginning of an Egyptian-trained military not dependent solely on birth or royal favor for its leadership. It was here that Sadat and Nasser became friends and decided they had much in common. They both saw the army as the way to overthrow the king and expel the British. Sadat and Nasser had no sooner graduated from military academy than the Second World War broke out. The British were fighting the Germans and Italians in North Africa. Sadat saw the war as an opportunity to hasten British defeat and their departure from Egypt. He decided to collaborate with the Germans.
We had a saying here that says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is quite simple like that. We were faced by a very grave situation. Rommel has reached Alamein, and he was about to capture Alexandria and then Cairo. So we tried to contact the Germans and tell them that we want our complete independence. And even if they want us to fight for this independence with them, we are ready.
Sadat, however, was caught by the British. He lost his army commission and was sent to prison.
When you look back, Mr. President, from the perspective of history, what do you think the world would have been like if Hitler had won the war?
Terrible. Terrible. It would have been very terrible. God will never permit this. We say this here. If there is something very outrageous, we say God will never permit this.
Sadat escaped from prison and disappeared into the crowded streets of Cairo. He lived as a fugitive and took up once more with Nasser the secret movement for revolution. 2 years later, he was back in jail.
I was accused of plotting for the assassination of some politician called Amin Osman here.
You were guilty, were you not?
Well, to a certain extent, I trained those students and those young men This was my main accusation, that I trained them to use hand grenades and pistols and so. I trained them. Yes, I trained them.
After a celebrated trial, Sadat was acquitted, and by 1952, the king's days were numbered. By now, the British were occupying only the Suez Canal zone, but Egyptian opposition even to that was mounting. 1952 was a landmark year. On the 25th of January, British soldiers surrounded an Egyptian police post in the canal town of Ismailia. They commanded the police to lay down their arms and leave the British area. The Egyptians refused. The fort was leveled. More than 50 Egyptians were killed. And the next day in Cairo, the mob took its revenge. Nasser and Sadat saw in this Black Saturday the public sentiment needed to assure their success. The revolution date was set for July, only 6 months away. On the day Nasser decided to strike, his lieutenant Anwar Sadat was serving in the Sinai. Nasser ordered him back to Cairo. When Sadat arrived at the station, a curious mix-up occurred.
Gamal didn't receive me, and this was not his custom at all. So I thought, nothing will happen today or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I said, I may go to the open-air cinema tonight and enjoy myself, and then after that, in the morning, I'll see Gamal.
While Sadat was at the movies, the coup began. Sadat finally caught up with it, and he was soon thoroughly involved.
I went to the Prime Minister and delivered the ultimatum to him. He was shocked, believe me, because up till this moment he didn't know that we were going to dethrone the king at all. He was shocked and received me like this. I told him yes. He said, are you powerful enough? I told him yes. Go and deliver it to the king. He must leave by 6 o'clock this evening.
The young officers were unsure whether their youth would work against them. Protectively, they appointed an older man, General Mohammed Naguib, as the man the public would see as their leader. Sadat remained in the background. Naguib, for all the ceremony, had no power. Nasser made all the decisions. Newsreels of the day were therefore slightly misleading.
From Cairo come these first authentic pictures of the bloodless coup by which the army took over control of Egypt. It was the end of the king's attempt to maintain power. Troops in the street were the first indication of the change to most people, until with the broadcasting station seized, it was announced that General Naguib, the commander-in-chief whom Farouk refused as war minister, had taken control, and the army were ordered to guard strategic points. The declared aim was to stop corruption. Struck at the top, and General Naguib shows the abdication papers signed by King Farouk in favor of his 7-month-old son. Meantime, from Alexandria, the royal yacht Marusa sails with the ex-king and the infant king for Capri. To the ordinary Egyptian, the change is welcome. What the change will mean to the rest of the world, we have yet to see.
The impression you had in Alexandria Harbor the night that the Marusa sailed King Farouk into exile?
Relax. Relax. Really.
Was the coup easier than you expected?
Very easy. Yes. Yes. Yes.
The new government, the Revolutionary Command Council, met legally for the first time.
And we were not prepared at all, either to form the government or to do whatever, anything at all. We were not prepared at all. Believe me, we were in a mess. What are we going to do? We are responsible now after the country, after Egypt.
By 1956, General Naguib had left government altogether. Nasser, now president, was to be Sadat's boss for the next 14 years. Egyptian nationalism did not wane under Nasser. If anything, it increased. Nasser appealed to the United States for arms and was turned down. He bought them from the Soviet bloc. Washington, in return, refused to provide the money it had promised for the badly needed Aswan High Dam. The Russians offered to pay. The Egyptians readily accepted. The American failure to provide the money led to the first serious Soviet penetration of Egypt. Sadat still blames the American Secretary of State John Foster Dulles.
We didn't like him here because he has never understood us. He has taken everything always black and white. Either you are with America or you are not with America, or you are an enemy of America. I don't like this attitude because there is a psychological element in the whole thing. We have our pride. We want to be friends with America, but we have our pride, and we don't want to be a puppet government, or we don't want to receive orders from Mr. Dulles. But we can be friends. He didn't understand this.
Sadat stepped into the shadows for the years of the Nasser regime. He did not really re-emerge until one night in December of 1969. Nasser, concerned about his own death and the perpetuation of his policies, named Anwar Sadat his vice president.
And he said, well, if I happen to die, I want you to continue, and I don't want anyone to humiliate this country again.
Did you take that as a pretty clear indication that he wanted you to be the next president?
Quite right. He never said this before.
If Anwar Sadat is a nationalist, he's also a peasant. He springs from the centuries-old underprivilege to overpopulate the Nile River Delta. Anwar Sadat's nationalism is rooted in the Egyptian peasantry. Even the poorest is attached to his nation's history. It is striking to realize that while part of Egypt is modern, much of it is the same as it was centuries ago. Transportation, tools, lifestyle. When Anwar Sadat was born on Christmas Day in 1918, his village of Mit al-Kum looked almost exactly as it does today. His father's job as a clerk had taken him to the Sudan, and Sadat lived with his grandmother. They were poor in a nation where even the richest Egyptian was one class below the resident foreigner. Sadat was one of 12 children. For several thousand years, his family and fellow villagers had been unable to escape the oppressive poverty. Sadat had never lived outside his village until the day his father was transferred to Cairo. He soon discovered that life in the city was different.
Believe me, it was very miserable for me when I left the village and came to town. I started to learn what's really the meaning to be poor. I started to know what is the meaning of class. I was very miserable, believe me.
Sadat has never overcome his distaste for the city and the restraining walls it imposes. There is not enough room in the garden of his Cairo home. Whenever he can, he retreats to a variety of country residences. Time is his enemy, and a day off with his wife and 2 of the 4 children is rare. He is not a very active man, but here on the edge of the Mediterranean, he and his wife, Jihan, take long walks. She is his second wife. He divorced his first in the late 1940s and met Jihan, who is half English, a short while later.
What did she say when you first asked her if she would marry you?
Well, she agreed at once. She agreed, in spite of the fact that there is a difference in age between us.
You were just irresistible.
I was admiring him so much because he was very faithful to his country and loyalty to his country.
The Sadats have 4 children, 2 married, 2 others, Nana and Gamal, still living at home. There is little time for the children, and they often resent it.
I want him to work with me, solve my problems, you know. I like to sit with him, you know. I've been sitting with him too much because of his work. And I miss him.
At home, Mrs. Sadat is the disciplinarian and usually takes the lead in family matters. Jihan Sadat is a leading Egyptian figure. She understands the real depths of the country's social problems.
She worries always, but she is very kind-hearted, and she is a real help.
No matter where a Muslim is, he has obligations. Whether in a mosque or in his living room, Sadat prays 5 times a day. Sadat's faith and obvious devotion to Islam has enhanced his image as a leader with other Arabs. During our visit, an afternoon in the country included a visit to his beach house. The president does not move even here without a strong detachment of bodyguards. Again, the president did little. He shuddered a little when his children raced by in their latest acquisition. He prefers to just sit and read. But sometimes his wife talks him into backgammon. She was winning, and he was pleasantly relieved when the Minister of Defense and his wife came by for a visit. Sadat does not have time for many close friends. He and Ahmed Ismail have been friends since they were young officers and joined the revolution. Revolution came naturally to Sadat, but he was not in government when the officers solidified their power.
I don't like the administration. I don't like it. It is something in my blood. I used to say to Nasser, I can help you, but I don't want to be a minister or something like that. I can help you from my stand in anywhere.
Because Sadat was not publicly apparent as part of Nasser's inner circle, most people judged him to be of little influence. Nasser's presidency, however, was marked by constant power struggles. The villager knew how to survive. Sadat returned to his old job as a journalist. He wrote a book on the revolution. We know now that he never lost contact with Nasser.
The others, when they disagree with him, they declare it and they make a show of it. But I disagreed with him, but we used to discuss this either at his home or at my home, and we used to have very hot discussions.
Nasser electrified and sometimes frightened the world. Sadat's style is different and many believe more effective.
President Nasser was, of course, in many ways the movie star of the Arab world, and his image still dominates a great deal of thought about the proper way of moving toward the future. President Sadat is a quieter man. He's more of a father figure. He's more of the ideal Egyptian villager.
Sadat served Nasser faithfully, often as a spokesman in foreign capitals.
I remember once when he was on his way to America, and people were worrying if he was going to make boo-boos all over the place. And an American friend of Nasser said, well, I don't think Anwar Sadat is smart enough to make any serious mistakes. He's bound to just go over there and be a genial boob everywhere. Nasser turned to this American and said contemptuously, have you ever heard of Goha? Now, do you know who Goha is? Goha is the man in a sort of an Aesop's fable character in Arabic literature who acts like he's a fool or buffoon, and really, while he's making you think he's a buffoon, he's removed your gold teeth from you without you realizing it. That's what Nasser meant.
For all his travels and apparent worldliness today, it is his village which draws him back. It is only here where Sadat sheds his tailored suits and French ties for his native Galabeya. He lives in the village's only large house. Even as president, he has done little to change the other side of the street. It is much today as it has always been. This is no longer the place where Sadat can walk unnoticed, but at least this is family, and the press of the crowd bothers him less. Here, he is not so much president of Egypt as he is village elder, the boy who made good. Here, Sadat hears blunt complaints about village problems and well-intended admonitions about his health. He relishes the role of patriarch, here and for Egypt as a whole. The villagers and he communicate easily.
Sadat's an Alabama politician. If you want to understand Sadat, understand John Sparkman from Alabama, a man who is highly educated, highly intelligent, but who knows how to say ain't, so that just a faint trace of quotes around it, so that if he's talking to someone who says ain't, they won't notice the quote, but someone who knows better, they will notice the quote. I'd say Anwar Sadat's that kind of a man. He aspires to be pretty much what he is.
It would be an insult for Sadat to visit the village without seeing an even older man, the teacher who taught him religion as a youth. Sadat says he will retire here in 1976, but not many people believe him. Politics is in his blood. Those who oppose him believe he will not easily relinquish power. Those who support him say he couldn't walk away from the problems of Egypt. Whatever the case, Sadat is convincing about the burdens of the presidency.
I have lost everything. I have lost my freedom. I have lost my life as an ordinary man that can walk whenever he feels like it, or stops working when he feels like it. I have lost all this.
Sadat the villager, Sadat the passionate nationalist, came to power suddenly. Though perhaps only he felt it for certain, his emergence as an Arab leader of note began the day that Nasser died in 1970.
You know, we thought at one time this man will never die. And because we were in such a mess, and we were humiliated, and we were injured, we have put all our burden on the shoulders of Nasser. It was a great shock for me, really a great shock. I couldn't continue at that day.
Sadat as president faced many of the same problems which had existed at the time of the revolution. The British had long ago signed an agreement to leave Egypt, but there were still foreign troops on Egyptian soil. Since the June War of 1967, the Israelis had occupied virtually all of Sinai. Sadat knew he must deal with Israeli occupation, but first he moved to establish his credentials at home. After 18 years of relative obscurity, few Egyptians knew much about this man. Those who thought they did believed he was easily manipulated.
I think the most difficult time was when he took power, and he discovered that he was surrounded by unfaithful lieutenants who tried to use him and to make him a stamp president, not a genuine president. And I think these people didn't know Sadat.
Sadat's first major crisis led to the purge of his opposition. An attempted coup led by the Vice President Ali Sabri failed almost as soon as it began. Sabri, seen here at his subsequent trial, was convicted and is still in prison. Also convicted were the Ministers of War, Interior, and Intelligence.
I'm very patient. I'm still a villager. I'm very patient. But I never lose my target at all. I may be patient, but at the end, I fulfill my mission.
Sadat had appeared to encourage those who thought he could be used. During his first speech, he said he could not shoulder the burdens alone, and that he would continue the course set by Nasser.
The Egyptians love their little political jokes, and one favorite anecdote of mine was told shortly after Nasser's death and Sadat's succession, which is of President Sadat going out in the presidential car for a drive with the same chauffeur who had served President Nasser. And they come to a crossroads, and the car stops. The chauffeur doesn't know which way to go, and he turns for guidance to President Sadat. Which way? And Sadat thinks for a few minutes and says, well, which way did President Nasser go? Oh, he always went left. Very well, then. Signal left and turn right.
Having established himself firmly at home, Sadat faltered on the issue of Israeli occupation.
I think probably as a political leader, the most critical moment came in 1972, which he had designated as the year of decision, and he failed to produce a decision. At that time, the students were bitterly against him, complaining. There were jokes about him all over the Middle East. People were laughing at him, ridiculing him. The economy was going badly, and there was no hope, no prospect of improvement. And worst of all, Sadat's diplomatic initiatives had failed completely. He felt he wasn't getting any support from the United States for an Israeli withdrawal from Sinai. He was absolutely facing a dead end.
It was not my fault that I couldn't achieve this. I have agreed with the Soviet Union leaders about certain amounts of arms that would reach me before the end of the year. And they agreed, but they didn't fulfill. I lost a lot of my popularity, but still, the man of the street, I felt, as I told you, I feel it always, I felt that I have still the confidence of the man of the street. And then everything came on July 72 when I made my decisions to send out the Soviet experts.
Sadat's decision to expel the Russians was warmly received at home. Sadat hoped that when the Russians left, President Nixon would exert more pressure on Israel for withdrawal. One of his initiatives moved through unusual channels. The former child movie star, now diplomat Shirley Temple Black, was visiting Cairo. Sadat admired her and asked her to tea.
Well, near the end of our conversation, he said, I would like you to take a message from me to your president. And I said, I'll be delighted to. And he said, Shirley, please tell your president that I am the first Arab leader, the first leader in over 20 years to actively seek peace. And we want peace in this country. He was very forceful about this. He repeated it. And I said I would take the message back to the president.
Mrs. Black was unable to see President Nixon or any of his aides. Finally, she left the message with Nixon's secretary, Rosemary Woods. With no response, Sadat laid his plans for the October War. The world was surprised at Sadat's decisiveness. The Israelis were surprised, even though they had seen Sadat move boldly in the first 3 years of office.
You may say that every year since 71, Sadat has made one major political decision which was very bold, imaginative, and successful. In May 71, in one strike, he got rid of the top echelon of the Nasser's political structure. In July 72, he kicked out the Russians. In October 73, he launched an offensive against Israel, which at least managed to terminate the no peace, no war situation which had existed in Egypt, which had become unbearable, and gradually these type of decisions have changed his image in this country as well.
Sadat maintains that his diplomatic failures left him no choice but to fight.
It was aimed as a limited operation. The land was not my aim at all. I wanted only to prove to the whole world that the Israeli theory of security would collapse and we would cross the canal and we could capture the Bar-Lev line. These were my aims.
Sadat himself was close to the campaign. During much of the fighting, he remained in the operations room. This is the first film ever allowed there, during a later briefing on troop status.
I was in the operation room and I received the reports one by one. The strong points of the Bar-Lev line is surrendering and is captured. And after 4 hours exactly, about 6 o'clock, it was quite obvious that the Israelis has lost their balance. At that time, I told my people in the operation room, my forces, I told them, felicitations. The Israelis has lost their balance.
The war left Sadat as a world leader with whom other leaders had to contend. President Nixon came to call. Sadat was now critical to peace or war. Henry Kissinger trekked to his door. Sadat believes in Kissinger. The momentum for settlement in the Middle East has slowed, but Kissinger's stock remains high.
We have a very cordial relationship, and we have based it up to now on speaking very frankly with each other. He tries to explain to me what his concerns are. I try to explain what, in my judgment, is possible. And, of course, it is part of my job in these negotiations to explain the Israeli point of view.
The real question is, if he wants Israeli withdrawals, does he understand that there has to be a political price and that it cannot simply be a unilateral military action? In other words, can he stop thinking only of withdrawal and start thinking about peace? Not only about what he wants from Israel, but what Israel wants from him. That's the great test, because he's not going to get any withdrawal without peace or some progress towards peace.
Most people are afraid that, think that he means well, but that simply he will let Israel down, if you wish, or he will not be able to deliver the goods in case of negotiations. Not so much because he doesn't want it. He seems to wish for some kind of settlement, but because the ties between Egypt and Syria, or between Egypt and the Palestinians, whatever it means, between the obligations that Egypt feels towards the remnant of the Arab world.
Sadat is an implacable enemy of Israel. This is also the truth. He's no fool, but he's an enemy.
One result of the October War was that Henry Kissinger negotiated an Israeli withdrawal from a small portion of Sinai. A year after the war, we went to Sinai with Sadat.
Mr. President, quite frankly, a great many people in the West look at the Sinai and they say, this is nothing but sand. Mm-hmm. Is there, in fact, no way in which a compromise can be achieved by which somewhere here in the Sinai, Israel can have the security it requires and you can have the honor you demand?
This is very important. This is not the correct logic, you see. If this is sand, well, the motherland, if it is sand, mud, or marshes, or whatever it is the motherland. I don't know if the ordinary American citizen can agree to the fact that anyone comes to some of the western desert, some of your deserts there, and grab by force a piece of this desert and then starts to impose his conditions. This is the situation here.
How can you convince the Israelis, who are 17 kilometers from you, granted sitting on your territory, that once you get Sinai back, you won't attack them?
How can you convince me on the other side that I shall not be attacked by them? This is the same thing.
During the 5 weeks we spent with Sadat, the issue of war and peace confronted him constantly, pursuing him even to his village. A representative of the Pope came to call. They discussed religious tolerance. A settlement in Jerusalem is important to other Arabs. Sadat would like the Pope to pressure the Israelis. Part of our stay was during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Like all good Muslims, Sadat fasted from sunup to sundown and often didn't begin work until late at night. Sometimes he works at the Abdeen Palace, built in splendor by King Farouk. He has few aides and rarely gives the impression of working hard. Critics believe the Egyptian bureaucracy rumbles on without a firm hand at the top. On another night, the American ambassador, Herman Isles, called on Sadat at home. The president often works here. He has the reputation of being a good listener and a persuasive talker. On any given night, the meetings reflected the effort for peace and the contingency for war. This night, first a group of businessmen who want to encourage tourists. Sadat gave the go-ahead for tourist centers. He hopes this will mean money in Egyptian pockets.
We have envisaged
The second meeting, preparation for fighting. The British Under-Secretary of Defense discussed an aircraft sale. It was not accidental that the third important man here was the personal representative of King Faisal. Saudi Arabia pays many of Egypt's bills. By the end of the evening, Sadat had purchased British helicopters. No matter how late his visitors ever left, he ended his evenings by sitting and watching a movie. Much of Sadat's time is devoted to ceremony. On this night, the swearing in of a new cabinet. There were no changes which marked a shift in policy. The business of fealty over, Sadat chaired a cabinet meeting. Sadat does not like detail and confines himself to broad directives. The issue here was galloping inflation and the need to reconstruct a staggering economy. Nowhere is reconstruction needed more than in the Suez Canal area. During our stay, we accompanied the president on what he called a reconstruction visit to the canal. Sadat does not travel to learn the hard facts. Those he can gather at home. The trip was intended to raise morale. It did. There was adulation everywhere, but nowhere more fervent than during a cruise in the harbor which finally led up the canal itself. The more effort Egypt puts into building here, the more encouraged are the Israelis.
If he reconstructs the canal area and opens the canal and puts hundreds of thousands of people back there, that indicates that he's not going to be very anxious to get them bombed out again. That's therefore a great index of whether he sees the peaceful option is available. And in the measure that he is putting people back in the canal and preparing to open it, that is a promising sign, an indication that the disengagement agreement is not simply a passing episode, but a possible step leading towards an unfreezing of the conflict.
During our stay with Sadat, he left the country only once to attend the Arab Summit meeting in Morocco. There, he was one of 20 Arab leaders, albeit a major one. He and King Faisal represent the Arab moderates. There were others there, less accommodating. At his borrowed villa outside Rabat, he tackled immediately the summit's #1 issue. How should the battle between King Hussein of Jordan and the Palestinians be resolved? Hussein and the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat came to pay court. Hussein wanted to speak for Palestinians inside Jordan. Arafat wanted to speak for Palestinians living everywhere.
You see, we are cooperating together. And as we have mentioned, there are 3 partners: Egyptians, Syrians, and the Palestinians.
The summit voted for Arafat, which was a defeat for Hussein and not the compromise Sadat would have preferred. Sadat did have the power to stop a Syrian move which would have aborted the American peace initiative in the Middle East. In a moment, we'll ask the president how the region has changed since the heads of state met.
President Sadat, the new element in the Middle East debate is the rise of the Palestinian Liberation Organization to represent the Palestinian people. Now, Mr. Arafat has said he is in favor of a Palestinian state containing a Jewish minority, but that would mean the dissolution of Israel. You've indicated that you're willing to accept an Israeli state. How do you compose the difference between you and Arafat?
If I am a Palestinian, I should say what Arafat says. It is their problem. But for me, I have stated my views, and the mere acceptance of the resolution 242 means that I accept Israel as a fact.
Sir, in the year since the October War, you and Egypt have gained little else than a minor disengagement on the Sinai. That, I know, is not the accomplishment you expected when the war ended.
Quite right.
Quite right. I should have liked that more progress would have taken place, but I am a man of realities. I don't dream. And I hope in the next 3 months, as I told you, we can speed up the momentum of the whole thing.
Are you, as President of Egypt, and is your nation prepared to live in peace with an Israel which does not expand beyond the 1967 borders?
I'm ready for a peace agreement with Israel. And this is valid up till this moment. I said much more than this. Let us do our best to end the state of belligerency that has already taken more than 26 years between the Arabs and the Israelis.
How much pressure is on you, Mr. President? If you didn't have the pressure of the wide variety of opinion in the Arab world on you, would you move faster? Would everything be easier?
I'm ready. I'm ready to move faster. But, my friend, just give me something concrete, and I'm ready this moment to start and work.
Well, what is concrete if we may look at the very next small step?
You want to know it practical on the ground?
Exactly.
Very well. I may tell you this. Israel must move on all the fronts. On the Egyptian front, the Syrian front, the Jordanian front, the Palestinian front now. But what I can give is this. The end of the state of belligerency that has already taken more than 26 years up till this moment. More than that, I'm going to ask a third party, like the United States. The United States has special relations with Israel. And I consider myself now the friend of the United States. Well, why not the United States come and guarantee both of us?
Has Henry Kissinger let you down in any way over the last year?
Not at all. Not at all. Henry Kissinger has always been up to his word. And President Ford, after he took power also, he has been always up to his word.
If the Americans do not produce for you, if Dr. Kissinger does not produce for you in the near future, will you abandon the United States? And where will that leave you? Or do you have no choice at the moment?
When I started my new chapter with the United States, it was not a policy of the moment or something that I needed for some time and then can drop it and so. I mean, with my new chapter with the United States, that we must keep at least, if it is not the best, the normal relations with the United States. Whatever the consequences are.
Well, are you in a position to carry out an offensive, defensive if war breaks out?
If Israel starts it, I have no choice. But I am not planning any offensive. I told you this. I tell you this now, as I told you before, when I was planning the offensive, I said I am planning for the offensive. And you didn't believe me at that time. I think you should believe me now. I'm not planning any offensive. The Arabs are not planning. Syria also is not planning any offensive.
At the beginning of this broadcast, the beginning of the Sadat biography, which we've just seen, Howard K. Smith said that the Americans were lucky to have Anwar Sadat because he was a moderate Arab leader. If there is no peace in a relatively short period of time, is there not a danger that moderates like Anwar Sadat will disappear?
Maybe. 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 Because, you see, Our people all over the Arab world are starting to feel frustration. But I think, and am sure also, that the United States can play the main role in keeping the momentum and in achieving peace in this area, because, frankly speaking, all the cards are in the hands of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, President Sadat.
Sadat Action Biography.